Based on your research, is DCM linked to grain-free pet foods?
No, I've done quite a bit of research on it and followed along since the beginning, and I have yet to see anything that validates anything even remotely similar to that.
Hmm. Do you believe, again, based on your research, do you believe that legumes, peas, or lentils in pet food are directly linked to DCM?
Not any more than grains.
And a little bit of a separate topic, but still something we see quite a bit. Do you believe that dogs evolved to eat, digest, consume kibble?
I think that if that were the case, then we could also say that humans evolved to eat and consume heat processed junk foods. And we know that that's not true by the increasing disease rates of all the things that pets are mimicking. We have increased heart disease, dental disease, digestive diseases, every disease under the sun. And if it's not working for us at this point, and we've had these heat processed foods for the same amount of time, why would it be working for them?
I could not agree more. Now, for those of you watching, now that I have your attention, because I know these are hot topics and you want to learn more about them, and I'm excited to talk more about these, I do want to take a moment and give more of an introduction to Chelsea because she is absolutely, and not trying to sound cheesy here, but a pet health hero. She's dedicated her professional life to helping us as pet parents and consumers understand pet food labeling, regulatory system, and terminology that we would see in pet food ingredients. In fact, she founded the foodregulationfacts.com. Did I get that correct?
Yes.
Which again educates pet parents on ingredients and labeling. She is a pet nutritionist as well as a pet food, as I said before, pet food regulation expert, manufacturer consultant. And you also attend most, if not all, of the AFCO meetings, which is the pet food regulatory system. So you're very integrated into what goes into pet food. You're researched and a really valuable asset in the community. So thank you so much for being here.
Mhm.
Um, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. I want to start a little basic because not everybody here maybe might be as comfortable with what DCM is. So, my understanding of DCM, you'll know a lot better than myself, is that it's a type of heart disease that results in an enlarged heart and had a lot of media attention over the last few years. Can you tell me a little bit more, kind of high level, of what DCM is?
Well, I don't think that you have to break it down to much more than that outside of saying that there are multiple different ways that the heart can be affected. So is it inflammation in the right ventral valve, the left valve? Like there's multiple things that can go wrong. So DCM is something that's being linked to dietary potential concerns. And if you go back to the beginning of it, the conversation was really like, hey, we think that this increase in heart disease is being caused by products that contain legumes and don't contain any grains. So by default, you would think you need to add grains in order for that to resolve. But there are multiple other factors that really do contribute. One being that at around that same time that the DCM conversation started, Petco decided that they were going to eliminate a bunch of brands from their shelves because they are trying to go a little bit more holistic. And it happened to be that a lot of the grain containing brands got kicked out and it was replaced with grain free products. And if you know about the pet food world and who owns the majority of foods that are out there, most of them are owned by Mars, Nestle, JM Smuckers, Colgate Palmolive. So those huge companies with many billions of dollars available to them every year, they weren't real happy about losing their shelf space. So they went on a campaign to promote their grain containing products by utilizing this DCM conversation. And just to keep in mind that the instance rate of DCM in dogs is, I believe, 0.000007%. So the likelihood of your pet getting this is very low, and almost all of the pets that have it genetically.
Right. And isn't it true that before the DCM concern, this heart disease concern went mainstream, that before that, there were far fewer claims of DCM concerns. And then when it became more mainstream, it got a little bit more popular, but still the likelihood was far less than even 1%.
Yeah, it's very much something, and we see this all the time in any number of things. Like, are you going to notice something if you're not looking for it? So the fact that everybody went looking for it, and everybody that did have a problem with their pet was submitting results, it increased the number of pets that were known about by specific people that were looking to find that information. But that doesn't mean that there was an increase in the number of pets that got it.
Right. It was just more awareness. And even with that awareness and some paranoia, if you will, the numbers were still relatively extremely low in the occurrence of DCM, is my understanding, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So what are they, I guess going back to DCM, what are some of the things you said there's a genetic component? What are some of the things that can potentially lead to DCM? It's a taurine deficiency primarily on the non-genetic side. Is that correct?
That is part of the argument, but there's actually not really clear evidence that that's true either. So and I will go back to the other thing in a second, but if you just look at taurine alone, there were studies that were done with the information that was submitted by pet owners where they looked at taurine levels in dogs that have DCM. And there was, I always word this wrong, but there was a look at dogs that are actually deficient in taurine and dogs that were high in taurine, all with DCM. And the ones that were high in taurine in this particular case, it was like 97% of the dogs with DCM were high in taurine. Now, we don't know exactly why that is. That could just be because the body is sequestering taurine from other tissues and transporting it over to the heart because there's an overall deficiency, but that science hasn't really been done. So, in theory, maybe that is true, but we don't necessarily know. And even if that is true, it's also important to consider, where do you get taurine? If you go to nutritiondata.com, you can pretty much put in any ingredient, including finished products like McDonald's. You can put in anything in there and it'll give you a nutritional profile of that product. So if you look up rice, look up barley, look up any kind of lentil, any number of things, what you're not going to find in there is taurine. Taurine is found in meat products. So how would adding grains into a product improve the taurine concentration in your pet's diet? It's not going to.
So what do you and I don't know if you know this, but what was the argument or is the argument of these manufacturers of all of a sudden when this DCM craze became more mainstream, where they came out with these ancient grain lines or grain inclusive lines? Like, what was their argument, that it wouldn't interfere with taurine absorption? Was that it?
No, it's just a marketing trend. Like, consumers really do drive the market, and enough consumers were worried, in large part because the big companies really did a great job of campaigning towards vets to say, you really need to get everybody off of these grain-free products. So there were so many vets that were vehemently pushing that they don't use grain-free products. So there were so many people contacting these companies and requesting products that have grains, and just by popular demand, they created them. I don't think that, at least not that I've seen, that there are any legitimate arguments that validate that a grain-containing product would support heart health. The other thing that I want to touch on too is, if you look at any AFCO book, which I always have like 10 laying around, the source of the majority of grains that are in the pet food industry is biodiesel trash and alcohol production trash. So in a lot of cases, they're legally registered as chemicals by the EPA. It's not a food product. It's not even run through a food industry. It's a chemical industry. So what they're trying to do is extract starches and sugars for the use in like ethanol or some kind of alcohol, and it leaves this high protein trash, again a chemical trash, and that has the potential to be profitable, so they sell that off into pet and ag feed. So let's say that there were value in grains for heart disease, would there still be value in grains if you're actually getting a chemical byproduct? No. So, in my opinion, if you feel really, really strongly that you need to be adding grains anyways, then I think that you should just be adding grains that you're buying from the grocery store, something that would be legal for you to consume. Either that or you need to contact the company and identify what their source is. I can think of two or three brands on the market that use grains that do a really good job with them, but that's a very small number when you look at how big the market is.
Would you be comfortable sharing those brands? It's fine if you're not.
Yeah. Dr. Harvey's, Carnivore, and Shine, the ones I can think of.
I've not heard of Shine.
Well, they're very small.
Okay, okay. I was like, "Wait, I know the others. We talk about those, but I've not heard of this one, so I'll have to look into it."
Mhm.
Um, and then we addressed this earlier, but specific to legumes, peas, lentils, then there's this argument of, okay, well, maybe I'm not convinced that my dog needs grains, but my understanding with conversing with you earlier is that um, legumes, peas, lentils, it's not that there's necessarily a concern between those linked to DCM. It's also the source of those as well potentially could be just as bad. Is that correct?
Yeah, those can also be used for biodiesel and for alcohol production. So I think that when it comes to those kinds of things, it's important to consider the value of everything in moderation and getting rotation. So if you know about the way that plants grow, especially things like legumes, they have this protective mechanism of anti nutrients where basically if a huge herd of deer come through and they're like, hey, these look delicious, if the plant itself is capable of causing some level of illness or discomfort, if everything is consumed, then the animals learn that and they don't eat all of the plant. So the plant survives and can regrow. So anti nutrients are actually a protective mechanism for the plant. So while they do have a lot of benefit, these plants, they also do have some detriment. So if you are using something that has legumes or grains or any number of ingredients, I mean, even spinach has high oxalates. Does that mean spinach is bad? No, but if you're using spinach all the time as a primary
Too much of
ingredient,
it. Yeah.
yeah, then it becomes a problem. So I think that the issue comes in is the way that we feed our pets in this country, and probably less so with your viewers, but as a whole, most people, they buy the one thing, they buy it all the time. They're told that they shouldn't be rotating. It's going to make their pet sick. And I always tell people, if your pet can't tolerate rotation, that's a symptom of a problem, not health. Like if I said I can only eat macaroni and cheese and everything else makes me sick, you'd think I need to see a specialist. I have something wrong. So we should view our pets the same way, and we should optimize their nutrition with rotation.
Agreed. Now, I do want to talk more about this biodiesel and rendering, but since we're talking about rotation, um, that is also a hot topic I get because I hear that a lot. Actually, is my dog can only eat this one food. In fact, I hear it quite a bit with these more prescription pet foods, which we won't go into that rabbit hole. But like, hey, my dog needs to be on this like hydrolyzed protein or very limited ingredient diet for the rest of their life. This is what their vet said. And, you know, again, I want to make this very clear in this content and all my content. We're not here for those watching. We're not here to prescribe, treat, diagnose, replace your vet's opinion. Rather, share resources, research, and our personal experience with you, so that you can share that with your vet and never worry or feel bad about getting a second vet opinion. Going to ahvma.org, find a pet section, has great resources. But with rotation, I hear that a lot, and I agree with you that being able to switch between brands and different foods and adding different fresh whole food toppers if you're feeding a primarily extruded kibble diet can be really valuable. And if your dog can't tolerate that, like you said, could be a problem. What do you think someone should do as a first step if they are experiencing the inability of changing their dog's diet at all?
I'd say a couple of things. The simple and free answer would be that they should consider adding in small natural supplements, like adding in raw goat milk or adding in bone broth or gelatin or something like that. The more expensive answer would be do some diagnostics, try and figure out what's actually wrong with your pet. It could be heavy metal toxicity, it could be a mineral imbalance, it could be a hormone imbalance, it could be a latent infection, it could be an abscess tooth. Like, there are a number of different things that we don't necessarily think of as being a cause of a systemic issue that results in an allergic or digestive negative response. But in reality, if the body is trying to create homeostasis in one area, it's often going to do that by purging some other area. So, overall, you're trying to identify the cause of a problem so that you're able to resolve that imbalance. With prescription foods, or even just staying on the same thing all the time, what you're effectively doing is preventing the presentation of a symptom, but that's not resolving the problem. And the longer you have a symptom without resolving it or working towards fixing the root cause, the more you move from an acute issue to a chronic issue, which then turns into some other kind of disease.
Extremely well said. Extremely well said. It's not necessary. And again, we're not saying stop your prescription food today and go against your vet. What I think what we're saying to those watching is, if you do have a dog that's on one diet today, whether it's prescription or not, and they can never seem to get them anything else, give them anything else. Um, I think the things that you mentioned, Chelsea, are really good resources and alternatives to explore. I think that's really valuable and important, and something that I think is really underrated to consider. So that's really good insight. So I want to get back to grains and even potentially legumes in probably majority or much of the pet foods out there today. And what you were saying earlier is that they can be a result of biodiesels and rendering, aka potentially grease, leftover grease from the restaurant um, system, and that's really scary to me. How can that happen?
Well, unfortunately, the majority of the ingredients that have definitions in the AFCO book are things that over the course of the 100 or so years that AFCO has been around, the lobbyists have said, hey, we need an outlet for this. We want you to make a definition. And people that are selling apples, they don't tend to go and work towards getting a definition. It's the companies that are producing millions of tons of waste every year that they need somewhere to put it. And I've heard in the AFCO meetings, honestly, the regulators be kind of surprised over people being horrified that the way that they develop definitions is they just accept something from a lobbyist, talk about it a little bit, and then usually just approve it without a whole lot of research behind it. Not to say that that's everything. They do have committees that will analyze some things, but I've also seen things move through very, very quickly that are pretty horrifying, like hydrogenated glycerides. I saw that one go through really quick, and there was an argument at an AFCO meeting between the soap making industry and the rendering industry, where the soap making industry was like, hydrogenated glycerides are a fat source that we use for making soap, and it's very contaminated. You can't feed that to cattle. And the rendering industry was like, well, it's our product, we're going to feed it. In the very next meeting, it had a definition.
That's terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And it's terrifying that this is not mainstream knowledge. Like, without somebody like yourself or like a Susan Thixton, we had her on. I wouldn't be aware of any of this because it's not like my understanding is, so AFCO, for those not as familiar, this is the pet regulatory, and it's not even really regulatory, right? It's really more of a how would you define AFCO?
It's a organization that feels pretty proud of themselves for being able to make suggestions that the states can choose to adopt or not.
And so that's why on a lot of pet foods, you'll see it's AFCO approved or certified, correct? Like some of them can claim that they follow those guidelines, or they don't choose to do that. Do you find a lot of value in that when picking a pet food?
Yes and no. So I feel like AFCO does most things very unethically and uh, with what I feel is very wrong thinking. But at the same time, I also feel like some basis of standard is better than none. And, I do also co own Parsley Pet, which does HTMA mineral and heavy metal uptake analysis. So I am able at this point to be able to just glance at the mineral report on a dog, and within 10 seconds, I can say this dog's doing a DIY formula that's not formulated. This one's doing a raw formula that is formulated. This one's doing a high heat processed product that contains synthetics. So it's really obvious on mineral uptake the way that you're feeding a pet. So, I think that it's beneficial to follow some level of guideline. Just like anything, though, just a little bit of knowledge can also be dangerous. And they even admit that in their book, where on the nutrient profiles, most minerals don't have a maximum. And they say in there, it's not because there isn't a maximum toxicity threshold, it's that we don't know what it is. So we're going to just not enforce anything. So that can also be concerning. So it really comes down to the company and whether or not they're putting in the effort to go above and beyond and learn what they're doing and why.
Are there other horrifying ingredients that are pretty common in pet food that you see that if you were buying a bag of food, you would avoid? I know you probably have a whole list of them, but are there a few that you can share? I think you've mentioned corn gluten meal in the past. I think I've read some stuff that's byproduct of ethanol
Mhm.
and things like that. What are some others that you would avoid at all cost?
Well, the worst one, in my opinion, and the reason I think that it's the worst more than anything is because it's hard to identify on a label because it can be labeled as so many things, but it's used restaurant grease, or they call it yellow grease. And that can be labeled as animal fat or vegetable oil, canola oil. Like if a restaurant specifically uses one type of fat for frying whatever it is that they're making, then it can be labeled that way, and that can be how it's put on to your label. But as we know, like from the human world, eating fried foods with highly oxidized fats is going to contribute to heart disease, among other things. So, of course, that's going to be contributing in our pets' food as well. Byproducts across the board. One thing that I think that a lot of people don't realize with byproducts, because I've heard, especially in the recent years, people saying, well, byproducts aren't that bad. I don't actually disagree with that. Like, I will pay $16 for a bully stick. That's a byproduct. And
Yeah.
clearly, it's a pretty valuable one for me to give to my pet. And my dog is willing to eat organs that I would not want to put in my mouth just because I would not like that taste. So that's not a bad thing. However, byproducts also have a price, they have a value, and whoever's selling them is going to want to make the most that they are able to make on them, which means that quality organs are going to go to a higher priced cause. Quality byproducts like bully sticks and feet and heads, things like that, those are also going to be higher priced. They're going to be using those to make chew bones and things that they can make a really decent profit on. So everything that's left over from that had no value in any other form is now considered a byproduct that was put onto a pet food label. what quality could that possibly be? So I think that there are a lot of conversations in the pet industry that, in a sense, are just a distraction to keep us from talking about what we should really be discussing. And I do bring up corn gluten meal as the primary one because it's just such a great example where we can say, corn, it has some protein, it's not that bad, you can feed it to your pets. Sure, that might be true if you're actually feeding corn, but the conversation should be, if corn goes through the chemical process of producing ethanol and is now legally registered as a chemical, and it contains 3 different antibiotics, anhydrous ammonia, sulfur dioxide, liquid urea, things that are so toxic that they can't release the water for production into the environment. Is that corn healthy? Does it even matter whether or not you can feed corn to a dog and have it be healthy? If that's the conversation, then no, it's irrelevant. So I think that it's important to understand the regulatory background so that you can understand what the actual conversation is that you should be having.
It's terrifying. So you said a second ago that these conversations around byproduct, for example, are possibly a distraction from the things we should really be focused on. What are some of those things as pet parents we should really be focused on when picking pet foods?
Um, I think, again, going back to the regulatory base, which especially Susan Thixton has so much information out there. So using TruthAboutPetFood.com as kind of a foundation to see what that conversation is that you should be having. So understanding, what is meal? Like, meal is not something that you could legally feed to a person. There's no chicken meal that you can buy for legal consumption for a pet. So there are arguments for why it's not that bad and why it is bad. Use the work of somebody that's already done that job and published it to identify a better understanding of what that conversation is. Synthetic vitamins and minerals are another one. There's I am very against them because, actually, more than anything, because of the AFCO book. If you read through some of the information in there, it's pretty horrifying. So I think that if you can gain an understanding of the arguments for and against a specific thing, then you'll be in a better place. So, like, when I do research, I will have the thing that I kind of by default, I'm like, okay, this is what I heard, and this is what I believe would be true. And to be, fair, that's probably what I want to be true. So I will try to do research that argues against what I want to be true so that I can identify where I really land. So I either validate or invalidate my own research. And doing that, I think, is probably one of the best ways to really figure out what aligns with your goals.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing about byproducts, because I was a similar mindset that there, because I think of the concept of like nose to tail, and if you think about a wild dog or a wolf, for example, they're not going to be biased of what part of the animal they're going to eat within reason. But my understanding is that with byproducts and byproduct meals and poultry byproduct, it's not even what the ingredient is, but that the quality of those typically are pretty low. Is that a fair statement, at least from my
Mhm.
experience?
Yep. Yeah, I know several people that have worked directly in the meat processing plants where they've said, you might have a decent cow that goes through, but it has a cancerous tumor and that gets cut off and thrown in a bucket that says pet food on it. And that's where that goes at the end of the day. And I've even heard some people and seen pictures where they say, the guys that are working there that day, they don't care what goes in that bucket. So they get off their break and their tobacco chew goes in there and plastic goes in there. So again, it comes down to, what is the company trying to do? Are they trying to make a profit, or are they trying to make a quality product? And their ethics and morals are really going to help to direct their sourcing and quality control.
What are some things we should look out for with sourcing? And for those watching, if you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I'm a big advocate of reaching out to the manufacturer directly, right? Not just trusting what you see on their website, especially. in asking these questions, what are some questions you would ask a brand if you were trying to learn more about their sourcing?
So number one thing is they should know more about their product than you do. And that is where I've had the hardest time with big companies like Science Diet and Royal Canin. Is I an example of one time that I called Science Diet, I asked them where their chicken comes from, and they said, well, we don't know, but we know it's good. I'm like, how do you know that it's good? You don't know where you get it. Well, we don't know, but we know that it's good. So whatever their answer is, even if you don't know an answer, they should know an answer. So I think that that's most important fundamentally, regardless of the questions, because you will just learn more questions to ask the more often you do that. So it's tough to give specific questions, but I think there are some fundamentals that have been set up by larger organizations to help us navigate the world a little better. So the non-GMO label, the certified welfare, like anything that the ASPCA endorses, they actually do a lot of auditing of companies to make sure that those claims are not just being used at random. Regenerative farms,
Mhm.
organic, all of the kind of keywords that we hear out there should be things that we should be able to ask and get a decent answer on.
Yeah. And for the record, that's very uncommon. If you look at all the pet foods available, it's very uncommon to find, which is unfortunate. But as you said before, consumers, our dollars speak volume. So the more we can ask these questions, demand these things, the better. I know that the next comment, though, is typically, well, this is all great, but, and I'm kind of going a little off topic, but it's something that's pretty relevant, I think, which is this is all great and I want to do the best by my pet, but I have limited budget, right? Like, so what are things that because you are, I mean, your experience in pet food, how to boost the bowl, if you will. And I do want to, in a moment, talk about your preferred foods and tie up a couple things on DCM. But if you have a pet parent that's like really worried about costs, but they really want to do the best for their pet, maybe they can't do a fully DIY raw or a complete and balanced pre-made. What would you maybe recommend to get started?
Well, what I find to be the most valuable for people is a question. Ask yourself what your goals actually are. So, is your goal to prevent cancer? Is your goal to provide the most meat? You have to give protein, fat, and carbohydrates in some form, and which one of those should be the primary thing that you're giving to your pet. If carbohydrates is the thing that you feel is most important, then you should be feeding kibble or adding in a lot of carbs into a fresh diet. If you feel like they should get meat, you can't feed kibble. So for me, most people that I say that to, the budget actually lightens up a little bit when they realize that what they are purchasing doesn't align with their number one goal. So if your number one goal is budget and there's nothing that supersedes that, then there are some kibble products that are out there that are better than others. The other thing I think is really important is ask yourself whether the product is benefiting just the things that go into the product or benefiting your pet. So what I mean by that is there are some product labels out there where the whole entire front of the label is, humane and animal welfare certified and da 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 da, and that's great because the animals that go into the food should be cared for, but the focus isn't on the metabolic effects for your pet. And generally, people are buying for their pet, number one. So I think that it's valuable to focus on that as well. There's always options for modifications too. So, if you're on a really tight budget and you have to feed a kibble product, then add in things that you're already eating, like add in a little bit of yogurt, add in some sardines, like add in any number of things. And remember that those things have caloric contributions. So you can decrease the amount of heat processed food that you're feeding, which is going to save you money, and add in something that's a lot healthier.
I really like how you explain that because I often talk about removing 10 to up to 20% of the bowl of kibble and replacing it with real, fresh, pet safe foods. Uh, but I like how I've never made that connection. I don't think in any of my content where when you remove that kibble, you're saving money. I mean, yes, you're putting in other foods, but it could even be scraps. The green leafy part of a strawberry or something. It could be the scraps of your vegetables that you add in. So to your point, just feeding them a little bit of what you already have, and maybe you have some I don't know, a banana that might be getting ready to go bad. Instead of throwing it out, it can be something you can give to your dog.
Mhm.
And I also like that you mentioned that there's a caloric impact, because I find a lot of people will come to my platforms. They're really excited about adding bowl toppers. Uh, and then their dog starts to gain weight slowly, which is not what we want to do. And so I think it's important to remember that we're replacing a small amount of the bowl of kibble, because we don't want to overfeed. Even overfeeding in healthy foods can potentially be harmful in that metabolic impact and weight gain.
And also, I think that when they are not gaining weight, the most common side effect of if there's a problem is that they get diarrhea. So, in my experience, the majority of people are overfeeding their pets by anywhere from 20 to 40%. So, if you are already feeding a high amount and then you add in more calories, there's a point at which you filled the cup and you overflowed the cup, and their system is like, I can't with this. And so they'll purge it. So what the owner thinks is, well, that was really too rich for my pet. I can't give them that kind of stuff. But in reality, you just gave them too much stuff. If you decreased the amount of other things that you were giving them, then they should be able to tolerate it. I see that the most with marrow bones. 3.5 ounces of marrow is 786 calories. So if you give your dog a raw marrow bone on top of their normal food, it's very likely that they're going to get diarrhea. That doesn't mean that it's too rich for them. It just means that you gave them too much in a day.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. So, because I do want to put a little bow on this DCM, grain-free, grain-inclusive legume conversation, to summarize that, what you're saying is, based on your research and based on your uh, experience, and based on we didn't even talk about the FDA and their statement in December, that they quietly came out and said that they didn't find any strong correlation between diet and DCM. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So even from the FDA, and there was this big splash when there was a potential correlation, and then they kind of quietly came out and said that. So this isn't just Chelsea or Rachel's opinion. This is from the FDA, and it's not to say that we don't need to monitor, and it's not to say that there may never be some correlation, but the likelihood seems to be not none.
Mhm.
And so, okay, so let's say I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, probably this conversation between grain free, grain inclusive DCM is probably money driven, as you alluded to in the beginning. So, what can I do? I'm still nervous about DCM because for the last 2 years, it's been my vet is telling me that I need to be concerned about it. So, I'm a pet parent, I'm a researched 2.0 pet parent, still nervous. What should I do? What would you say if you were in that person's shoes?
Mm-hmm. Actually, this links to a comment that I saw earlier about how pets shouldn't need grains if wolves don't. So I do agree with that. However, there is some value to carbohydrates, whether that's from a grain source or vegetable or whatever you're getting it from. And just like with humans, if there's a bodybuilder that doesn't want to burn muscle, then they'll carb load immediately before activity. So you can do that same kind of thing with your pet, where you can feed them a fresh food diet that doesn't have grains or legumes, and if you're still concerned, then you can get, like I said earlier, a quality grain product like organic gluten-free oats that you would buy for yourself. My understanding is that oats are the richest in actual nutrients as far as grain goes. You can make that into, say a blend of different ingredients or just cooked oats. You can freeze it into a little treat or cook it or whatever you want to do. And you can carb load your pet immediately before activity. So we do know that 50 to 75% of dogs are dying of cancer right now. and high carb content in the food for regular use is a primary cause of that and other metabolic diseases. So in my mind, the potential benefit of adding in a lot of carbs all the time to protect from heart disease that almost never occurs is not worth the value because it's going to contribute to cancers. But you can make them burn up those carbohydrates quickly by only giving those products immediately before activity.
Yeah. And I think to your point, the quality of it is so important. I get a lot of questions about these really cute and I know which ones you know what I'm talking about, but these cute popular dog biscuit treats, right? And or these treats made with oats that are so cute and fairly limited ingredient, but still the primary majority of it are made with these oats and grains and starches. And my thought on that is, we don't know the quality of that. And to your point, with biodiesel and rendering, that could be concerning. GMO as well, I think, is also a potential concern. But I agree with you. I think that, there can be, I mean, it is known that dogs have no biological requirement for carbohydrates. And I used to be of the mindset of like, I'm never going to give my dogs any amount of dietary carbohydrates, like not even a little bit of sweet potato, because it's just what I kind of my mindset. But now I've since evolved my learning and my thought process, learning from smarter than myself humans like yourself. Um, that yes, nutrient dense, fiber rich, low glycemic produce or carbohydrate dietary sources can be beneficial. If nothing else, adding a little bit of enrichment to my dog's bowl or plate, however you feed your dog. And I agree with you that carb loading ahead of time could be interesting, but even I've read studies about these sled dogs, these high active working dogs, and they're still eating low carb, higher protein, higher fat diets, which I think is really interesting. And I think that's like that could be a whole nother live we do together about, carbohydrates are so prevalent in most all pet food, probably 98% of it, if we look at all the pet foods out there, not because it's beneficial for dogs per se, but rather it's cheap. It's the cheapest ingredient to add.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, just to give you an idea of the amount of meat that's in most kibble products, there's an ultra premium kibble product that for a short period of time, they listed on the back of the bag the percentage of animal protein that was contributing to total protein. And in this case, it was 13%. So 13% of the 24% protein was from meat. So in calculating that down to grams, that was less than zero point 0.1 ounces of meat per cup of food. So it would take a 50-pound dog like 2 weeks to eat a cup of food or a cup of meat. So I think that goes back to what I was saying about like, what are your goals? What do you feel like you should be giving your pet? Because if you want to be giving them primarily carbs, then kibble aligns with that. But if you want to be giving them primarily meat, then it's just not possible to
Yeah.
be feeding them a kibble and have that attained.
But Chelsea, dogs evolved to eat kibble and they're omnivores because my vet said so.
Mhm.
what are and I don't want to say that mockingly, because I think that again, even, and there's no vet shaming, because I know there's vets that will watch this. It's what they learn, and where they learn it from is essentially funded by big pet food, which again can be a whole nother conversation. Um, but I mean, I'd love to hear from you and your thoughts of dogs being omnivores and that they evolved to eat kibble.
Hmm. Well, they are scavengers and they do have an incredible tolerance for nutritional abuse. That doesn't mean that we should be nutritionally abusing them, though. And like I had mentioned earlier, if you look at the history and timeline of the development of heat processed foods, like we started making shelf stable foods for pets in about the 30s in canned foods. Then we had a war and we weren't allowed to do canned foods anymore. And so, literally, while watching breakfast cereal for children being made, somebody was like, oh, look at that. We don't have to use cans. We can have this shelf stable product in a cardboard box. If we just make cereal for pets, that's how the kibble industry developed. So in the 1950s, that's when the first product for humans was made that was a complete diet that you could just make at home, like a heat processed, shelf stable sort of a thing. And we've had an increasing number of shelf stable junk food products available to us ever since then. And we have watched the disease rates tick up on all of these different diseases in humans. And those exact same diseases are affecting our pets now. And it's been the same amount of time. Like the first more popular kibble products that were getting out into mass market also came around in about the 50s. So just what I said earlier, like why would we feel like we see disease rates going skyrocketing for one species, humans, and we're constantly recommending to people that you should have more fresh foods, more raw foods, more whole foods, because that's the only way for you to really avoid getting some of these diseases at a young age, and then say the exact opposite of that for our pets and have that make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And, speaking of those diseases, I mean, for a couple statistics, which anybody can look up, like the chances of a dog getting cancer, and you talked about cancer earlier, once they hit 10 years old, it's 1 in 2 chance. And before they're 10, it's a 1 in 3 chance of your dog getting cancer. And then obesity, I think it's almost at 60% now that of dogs being overweight or obese. Kidney disease triples in growth every year. Epilepsy, seizure activity, all of these things that absolutely can be impacted by diet. And so I think it's really important to think about that. And I love that you talked about the origin of kibble. It's relatively new. It's a relatively new way of feeding our pets. Um, all that to say, though, for anyone watching, I don't Chelsea, I know that Chelsea and I are not sitting here trying to shame you based on what you're feeding your dog, because I know that there are quite a few people that will join or see this for the first time, and maybe they are feeding kibble. The intention is not to make you feel guilty about your choice. The intention here is to help educate you so that you can make an informed decision, as Chelsea said, based on your goal. And there are many easy ways to, one, pick a better kibble option, and or ideally adding a little bit of pet safe fresh foods to the bowl so they get some of that real live nutrition. So there are definitely easy and affordable ways that we talked about in this video to do that. I do want to make sure we have some time, though. Gosh, this time is so many other things I want to ask you, but I do want to talk a little bit about your pet project, pun intended, with Solutions Pet Products, which is a sustainably sourced, organic, frozen, raw uh, pet food slash supplement company that I think is incredible, and is bridging a gap between what pet parents want and cannot get access to because it really doesn't exist in the market. And you were like in that perfect little bubble, and I don't think enough people know about it. I'd love to learn a little bit more about it from you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, one of the more unique things about Solutions is that, like, I know with a lot of raw food manufacturers, they hesitate to source with the ideal quality of ingredients because that does push the price point up so high that people can't afford to do it. So we did that. We were like, well, I mean, this is what it has to cost in order to have this quality of sourcing. Like, you can't get around it. You can't get less expensive. But where we shine with everything is we made the formulas in a way where they're so nutritionally concentrated that you can feed a significantly lower amount in order to get the same caloric intake every day so that it's still an affordable food. So the average fresh food is 40 calories an ounce. Ours is 88 calories an ounce. So you can feed less than half of what you would feed with another brand. And that actually makes it work out to be one of the least expensive raw foods that I've seen to feed if you're feeding it correctly. And then on top of that, we have a variety of different supplemental products. We've got 4 different variations of raw goat milk. We've got 3 different gelatin products. We've got 4 different soft cheeses. And then we have a line of herbs. So, collectively, you can do a variety of different modifications to accommodate whatever's going on with your pet, even just as simple as like, I don't want to buy extra treats. So can I just like put this milk into an enrichment mat and give that to my pet instead of giving cookies? Stuff like that can work really well as well. So labor of love, it's really difficult to make a food product or any kind of supplement with that level of quality because it does really limit where you can get stuff. But again, we all have to align with our goals. And that's a primary goal for me, especially being such an advocate. Like, it's heartbreaking on a daily basis to see how this industry functions. So I, more than anything, am an advocate for making sure that there's a space in the industry where the best of the best can exist. And if that means that I have to do 10 times more work, then that's what it takes.
Yeah. And it's been really, really well received. A lot of nutritionists and veterinarians who I look up to have raved about the products. I haven't personally been able to try it, so I need to get my hands on it. But I know anything that you and your team works on is something I 100% will stand behind. Where can you find? Because you can't ship, correct? Or do you ship?
We don't ship. There are a
Okay.
few other companies that will ship direct to consumer. We do have nationwide distribution, except for
Right.
just the southern central part of the country, which we're working on. And then in the next month, we'll have like the southeastern part of the country. Right now, that's primarily direct to consumer. But like I said, if you want to do direct to consumer, you can go through Raw Pets or um, Rossum Pet
Okay.
or Amorog Raw. And then outside of that, for the most part, with most of the country, you can just ask your preferred retailer to order it because they do have access to it.
Yeah, and I will have all of it's solutionspetproducts.com, but I already have it there, but I'll have everything linked in the description below for those interested. I highly recommend to at least try some of their dairy products or gelatin. They're fun. I mean, I've fed similar products and they're fun to feed, and it's a great, as you said, nutrient dense source of food, whole real foods that are ethically sourced. I know you support regenerative farming. Um, and that's really cool. And this is the kind of, I mean, I even think about like, you know, I know you said that there's higher costs to manufacture and produce and craft a food and product like this. But it wasn't that long ago that the thought of people buying, raw frozen foods in pet stores because of the cost seemed feasible. So I think if we keep pushing and we keep seeing brands like yours and we keep supporting brands like yours, we're going to see this be more mainstream. And hopefully, if it becomes more mainstream, costs will lower. But only us as pet parents, if we go and support and purchase, can make that happen. It's really on us.
Yeah, vote with your dollar. And
Yes.
I think that that is a primary thing with brands. If you're buying a Hills product because you think it might help your pet, you're also supporting Colgate Palmolive. You're supporting a company that has killed a lot of pets with vitamin D toxicity, and just know about the things that you're buying.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are there any other things I didn't remember to bring up that you want to make sure you touch before we close this out? That you want to make sure that we cover?
um, The only other thing would be if you're doing DIY, then I do recommend that you meticulously formulate. It is actually really difficult to get diets right, and we do see problems on the Parsley Pet results. So, animaldietformulator.com, you can purchase that as a membership and you can formulate like 100 diets if you want on there, where you're sure that you're getting enough nutrients. And even if the nutrients are only complete through, let's say, 5 different diets that you make, and you give a different one of those every single day. So over the course of 5 days, you're covering all the nutrient bases. That's still more valuable than just coming up with something that is fresh. So therefore, it just seems good enough, but you end up with a lot of anxiety, allergies, digestive issues, just all of the things that associate with mineral deficiencies over time.
Yeah. And there's actually a 2.0 version coming out, correct, of the
Mhm.
formulator. So that's exciting. Do you do any recipes or anything like that, or probably too busy at
Mm-mm.
this point? Yeah, I figured there's a lot going on.
Mhm.
No, this was, and you know what? Let's talk briefly on parsley because we didn't talk about parsley, and I want to make sure if anybody, I think there's a lot of benefit there, and I actually want to learn more about it, honestly, and then we can wrap up.
Mhm. So it's just a hair analysis test. So you just take a little hair clipping from around the neck and the head area, you mail it in, you get the results back. And again, it will tell you the uptake over time. So not what's circulating in the blood, because that can change in a short time. Like you just fed your dog a raw bone, their phosphorus and calcium levels will probably bump up a little bit in the blood temporarily, but the uptake over time is going to be a little bit different.
Right.
So you'll see toxicities and deficiencies, and also for heavy metals. And the value of that, just like every test, like nothing is going to give you 100% of the information that you need for everything all the time. But it does help you to establish where there are imbalances and what specifically you need to work on. So, like, for example, I've seen symptoms where you would think that copper levels are really low, and then you get the test result back and the copper level is in range, but maybe zinc is too low. So, if you were to supplement with copper, you might have actually accidentally created a toxicity where you didn't intend to. So, it just helps you to establish a better, like, protocol. Like,
Yeah.
what specifically do I need to do to get my pet balanced? And are the things that are affecting them something that you can visibly see? Like heart disease, as a matter of fact, is something that, if it is a significant heart disease, you can see it on the parsley pet tests. It affects the minerals that much.
Interesting, interesting. So where are the places that we can find you and your products? We have solutions, petproducts.com,
Mm-hmm.
parsleypet.com,
Mm-hmm.
and then the foodregulationfacts.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
And
anywhere
then
else?
heroespets.com. And that website, I mean, we can ship some things out more than anything. We've got a lot of blog pages on there, and especially the one on the used restaurant grease and food. That's actually probably my favorite article that I've ever written. So I always
Okay. I
see
will
that.
link that. Yeah, I'll go find that and link that below so that people can read that. I want to read it, so I'm interested in getting that. But Chelsea, thank you. I look up to you and all the work you put into researching pet food ingredients, nutrition, regulation, all of it. I appreciate you putting all the effort into creating products to bring to market to make it easier for us to feed our pets better. And with that, for those watching, make sure you subscribe, you share. This information needs to be seen by the masses, and it can't be without your help. So